Something has happened that no one in the country music world saw coming. After decades of heartfelt performances, chart-topping hits, and standing ovations, Vince Gill, one of the genre's most respected and beloved artists, has released a letter that has left fans stunned, emotional, and full of questions. It's being referred to as his final letter. While the message itself is calm and sincere, the implications are far more serious than anyone expected. This isn't just a simple note of gratitude or a standard retirement announcement. It feels like something deeper, something more final. Fans and music insiders alike are scrambling to understand the full meaning behind his words. Why now? Why this tone? Why does this letter feel more like a goodbye than just a pause? Some believe there's more to the story than meets the eye. Could it be an undisclosed health issue? A personal crisis? Or is it simply the quiet end of an era for an artist who gave everything and is now walking away without fanfare? No one knows for sure, but one thing is certain. Vince Gill's emotional message is sparking speculation, stirring strong reactions, and changing how fans view his legacy. Vince Gill's journey through the world of music is nothing short of extraordinary. His story is one of quiet resilience, consistent dedication, and deeply rooted talent. Born Vincent Grant Gill on April 12, 1957, in Norman, Oklahoma, his early life laid the foundation for a remarkable musical path. From a young age, Vince displayed a natural connection to music. Whether singing or playing instruments, his passion was undeniable. Surrounded by the rich musical traditions of Oklahoma, Vince's style was rooted in sincerity and soul, qualities that would remain at the heart of his work for decades. In the 1970s, he began performing with local bluegrass bands, immersing himself in the genre's acoustic purity and grassroots spirit. One of these early groups was Mountain Smoke, a bluegrass band with a strong regional following. These years shaped Vince's identity as a serious musician. His skills as a vocalist and guitarist flourished, as did his confidence, and it became clear he was destined for more than just the local circuit. In 1979, Vince took a major step forward by joining the country rock band Pure Prairie League as lead vocalist and guitarist. His voice brought a fresh emotional depth to the band's sound. Their hit song, Let Me Love You Tonight, became a national success, giving Vince his first real taste of fame. It was a turning point. He was introduced to larger audiences, experienced the rigors of touring, and proved he could thrive in the commercial music world without sacrificing authenticity. Yet, Vince's artistic instincts led him in a new direction. In 1983, he left the band and moved to Nashville, Tennessee, the heart of country music, to pursue a solo career. He signed with RCA Records and began the long, often difficult climb toward establishing himself as a solo artist. Though his early solo albums gained some attention, Vince didn't achieve breakout success right away. But he stayed patient, focusing on crafting songs that were honest and emotional. He didn't chase trends, he trusted his own voice, and that made all the difference. Everything changed in 1989 with the release of When I Call Your Name. The title track, a heartfelt ballad of heartbreak and longing, became a major hit. It not only showcased Vince's vocal range, but also his storytelling ability. The song earned him a Grammy Award and marked his arrival as one of country music's leading voices. No longer a promising up-and-comer, Vince had officially become a star. The industry took notice, and fans began a loyalty that would last for decades. The 1990s became Vince Gill's golden era, defined by a string of critically acclaimed and commercially successful albums. Works like Pocket Full of Gold, I Still Believe in You, and High Lonesome Sound weren't just hits, they were deeply personal. Vince had a gift for singing about real life with honesty and tenderness. His music wasn't flashy, but it resonated with listeners because it was authentic. Whether singing about love, loss, regret, or redemption, Vince's voice carried an emotional weight that set him apart. He didn't reinvent himself to stay relevant. He stayed true to who he was, and that became his strength. From 1991 to 1995, he won the Country Music Association's Male Vocalist of the Year award 5 years in a row, a stunning achievement that reflected both his talent and the deep respect he earned across the industry. Colleagues admired not just his musical prowess, but his humility and generosity. He was known as one of the kindest people in Nashville. While fans loved his voice, musicians knew he was also a world-class guitarist, often playing lead guitar on his own records, something rare among vocalists. His guitar work, whether tender acoustic solos or soaring electric riffs, added layers of emotional texture to his songs. His ballads in particular became deeply ingrained in American culture, Songs like When I Call Your Name, I Still Believe in You, and Look at Us became staples at weddings, funerals, and other emotional moments. Vince had a rare ability to express what people felt but couldn't say, using music to give voice to the unspoken. He didn't need theatrics, he had truth. As his reputation grew, so did his influence. Younger artists looked up to him not just for his success, but for his character. He mentored many, participated in collaborative projects, and was a regular presence at award shows and benefit concerts. He was steady, calm, and grounded, a man who had done things the right way and never lost his way in the spotlight. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, Vince continued exploring different musical paths, blending gospel, bluegrass, and rock into his albums. Even as the industry grew more commercialized, Vince remained a symbol of what country music could be at its best: deep, thoughtful, and timeless. His collaborations spanned genres, yet he never lost his unique style. By the end of the decade, it was clear that Vince Gill hadn't just earned awards, he had earned lasting respect. His authenticity, his voice, and his compassion had touched millions. Despite his success, Vince's story didn't end with the hits. As the music landscape shifted, particularly in the 2010s, Vince became a vocal advocate for the genre's artistic soul. The rise of bro country, a subgenre dominated by themes of partying, trucks, and shallow romance, concerned Vince. Known for his depth and emotional storytelling, he didn't stay silent. While never harsh or confrontational, he openly questioned the direction country music was taking. He lamented the loss of substance and emotional truth in favor of formulaic, catchy songs that seemed crafted more for streaming numbers than for human connection. His critique wasn't an attack on younger artists, it was a defense of the genre he had given his life to. He believed music should speak to the heart, not just the dance floor. Though many longtime fans praised Vince for standing up for meaningful songwriting, others saw his comments as outdated. To some, he seemed unwilling to embrace change. But those criticisms missed the heart of Vince's message. He was never against evolution. He had always welcomed fresh voices and had a long record of mentoring new talent. What worried him wasn't innovation, it was the loss of purpose. For Vince Gill, country music had always been about truth, heart, and healing. And he wasn't ready to see that disappear without a fight. For someone like Vince Gill, who had built a career on authenticity, musicianship, and emotional honesty, it was disheartening to watch the genre of country music become increasingly shaped by commercial interests rather than creative expression. He often emphasized that music didn't have to be one-dimensional to be successful, that it was entirely possible to be innovative without sacrificing depth. Gill's concerns extended beyond just the lyrical content of modern country. He also spoke candidly about the behind-the-scenes realities of the music business, particularly the industry politics that often dictate which artists succeed and which are sidelined. Unlike many established figures who shy away from transparency to maintain their status, Vince Gill didn't hesitate to voice what many artists only whispered in private. He openly discussed the role that favoritism plays in radio airplay and award nominations, pointing out that deserving talent is sometimes overlooked simply because they don't fit a specific mold or aren't backed by powerful labels. These comments, while delivered in his signature calm and composed manner, struck a nerve with some industry insiders. Nashville, like many entertainment hubs, is a town where relationships and influence can mean as much, if not more, than artistry. By shining a light on these dynamics, Gill wasn't trying to stir conflict. He was advocating for fairness and transparency, hoping to see a system that valued quality and effort over image and commercial packaging. In the carefully curated world of modern country, where many artists tread lightly for fear of losing radio support or fan approval, Gill's honesty was both rare and necessary. He made it clear that the industry's current structure often placed too much emphasis on conformity and too little on diversity of sound and perspective. He lamented the decline in opportunities for artists whose styles didn't align with the mainstream, particularly older artists, women, and those who chose to sing about difficult or complex topics. To Gill, this wasn't just an artistic issue, it was a cultural one. Country music, at its best, had always been about giving voice to ordinary people's stories. When that voice became narrow or exclusive, something vital was lost. His call wasn't for a return to the past, but for a more inclusive and thoughtful future, one where tradition and progress could coexist. Of course, such forthrightness didn't always come without consequences. While many fans and fellow musicians appreciated his willingness to speak truthfully, there were those in the industry who preferred not to have such conversations aired publicly. Gill, however, was never motivated by controversy. His words were driven by conviction, by a lifelong belief in the power of music to uplift, challenge, and heal. He didn't claim to have all the answers, but he insisted on asking the right questions. And perhaps more importantly, he led by example. Even as he criticized certain aspects of the genre, he continued to create music that embodied the very values he championed: emotional depth, lyrical craftsmanship, and musical excellence. He proved that it was still possible to make meaningful art, even in a landscape increasingly dominated by trends and marketing strategies. Even as Vince Gill continued to serve as one of the most respected voices in country music, defending the genre's authenticity, calling out industry favoritism, and staying true to the values that had long defined his artistry, his personal life was undergoing significant and deeply emotional changes that would draw the public's attention in unexpected ways. In 1997, Gill finalized his divorce from Janice Oliver, a fellow country musician and one half of the duo Sweethearts of the Rodeo. Their marriage, which had begun in 1980, had lasted nearly 2 decades and had brought forth not just a shared love for music but also a daughter, Jenny. The split was not described as scandalous, nor did it unfold with the kind of explosive headlines that often accompany high-profile separations. But because of Gill's status in the industry, and the deeply emotional tone that often permeated his music, fans and media alike were naturally drawn to the quiet unraveling of his long-standing marriage. The end of such a significant chapter in his personal life added another layer of humanity to an artist already known for wearing his heart on his sleeve. There was no public mudslinging, no interviews filled with blame or accusation, which spoke volumes about Gill's desire to handle such matters with dignity and discretion. Still, the timing of the divorce, alongside his growing closeness with Christian music star Amy Grant, raised eyebrows. Grant, too, was navigating her own divorce around that period, and the overlapping timelines of both artists' separations led to increased public speculation. Whispers of an affair began to circulate in tabloids and among fans, despite the absence of direct confirmation or salacious detail from either party involved. The scrutiny Gill faced during this time wasn't born of malice, but it reflected the emotional investment many people had in his life and character. As someone whose songs often reflected themes of love, heartbreak, faith, and redemption, the public naturally projected his personal circumstances onto the art they held so dearly. And though Gill and Grant's relationship would eventually evolve into a lasting and meaningful marriage, the early days of their connection were met with a mix of curiosity and judgment. For some fans, particularly those in religious circles who followed Grant's career closely, the perception of overlapping romantic timelines conflicted with the image they had of both artists. Yet neither Gill nor Grant offered defensive or dramatic responses to these rumors. Instead, they allowed time and their actions to speak for them. Gill, in particular, remained focused on his music, channeling his experiences into songs that bore even more emotional weight than before. He did not deny the pain of the transition, nor did he make public attempts to reshape the narrative in his favor. His approach, as always, was rooted in sincerity. He let the truth of his life echo quietly through his music, where fans could hear the vulnerability in his voice and sense the complexity behind his lyrics. Even after Vince Gill and Amy Grant had weathered the emotional turbulence of divorce and begun to establish a new life together, the shadows cast by their past relationships did not disappear so easily. What made their situation especially sensitive was the timing and context in which they met and began working together. Both were still married when their professional paths crossed, though they've long maintained that their relationship did not become romantic until after their respective divorces. Many onlookers, especially in the Christian music community and within tabloid media, were not convinced. The backlash they received, particularly directed at Amy Grant, was swift and difficult. For Grant, who had built her career on both musical excellence and a deeply rooted faith-based image, this speculation struck a nerve with many longtime fans. Her standing within the Christian music industry, where public figures are often held to high moral expectations, suffered a noticeable blow. Accusations of impropriety, even if never substantiated, held the power to damage reputations, especially for someone whose career had been so closely tied to her religious values. Some radio stations reportedly scaled back her airplay. Others in the faith community questioned her judgment, casting her in a light that did not reflect the grace and compassion she had consistently advocated in her music. For Vince Gill, while he wasn't tethered to a specific religious genre the way Grant was, he too faced an uncomfortable level of scrutiny. Fans and critics alike speculated about the overlap between the end of his marriage and the beginning of his involvement with Amy. It was a storyline ripe for tabloid headlines and water-cooler gossip, two highly respected, family-oriented artists from separate worlds seemingly caught up in a scandal. Yet through it all, both Gill and Grant remained largely composed, refusing to feed the media frenzy with either denial or explanation. In interviews that came years later, both acknowledged the hardship of that time but stood firm in their belief that they had done their best to navigate a deeply personal situation with integrity. They admitted the pain it caused, not just to themselves, but to their children, former spouses, and fans. But they also emphasized the importance of grace, healing, and moving forward. The scrutiny Vince Gill and Amy Grant faced in the wake of their relationship continued even after the media frenzy had calmed, and it took on a more pointed and ideological form, one rooted in religion and moral expectation. After their marriage, which united two beloved figures from distinct yet overlapping musical realms, they still found themselves under a microscope, especially from within the conservative Christian community. For Amy Grant, who had built a towering career in contemporary Christian music, the decision to remarry after a divorce was more than a personal milestone, it became a public and theological flashpoint. Many evangelical followers who had once praised her for her spiritual leadership and lyrical devotion now questioned the alignment between her personal choices and the values they had long associated with her music. Vince Gill, by extension, was not spared either. Though his background wasn't primarily tied to faith-based audiences, his union with Grant brought him into closer contact with that world, and not everyone welcomed him with open arms. To some observers, the criticism might seem disproportionate or even unfair. After all, both Gill and Grant had gone through deeply personal, painful divorces before finding companionship in each other. But within parts of the Christian community, divorce, and especially remarriage, has long remained controversial and deeply judged. The topic of divorce has always been controversial, and when public figures with strong religious ties are involved, it often triggers more than just opinions. It becomes a matter of moral judgment. For many conservative Christians, Amy Grant's decision to marry Vince Gill after her divorce from Gary Chapman clashed with the image they had long held of her: a devoted wife, a spiritual role model, and a symbol of grace and unwavering morality. Vince Gill, by association, found himself drawn into this intense public discourse, not necessarily because of any wrongdoing, but because of the expectations placed on Amy and, consequently, on him. Their relationship, which both insisted began after their respective marriages had ended, was seen by some as a symbolic departure from traditional Christian values, a step toward modern, more permissive attitudes about love, marriage, and forgiveness. For fans who had grown up listening to Amy Grant's early worship music and viewed her as a spiritual compass, this shift was deeply unsettling. Letters were written, sermons were preached, and Christian publications debated her choices. It was less about actions and more about what those actions were perceived to represent in the larger Christian narrative. Vince Gill, though not immersed in the Christian music scene like Amy, had always been known as a humble, family-oriented man who respected faith and avoided controversy. Yet, by marrying someone so closely associated with the evangelical world, he inadvertently became a target of criticism. Some painted him as the man who led Amy astray, an outsider disrupting what had once been viewed as a near-sacred legacy. This backlash, while indirect, was real and emotionally charged. Still, Vince Gill remained grounded. Despite years of public scrutiny and religious judgment, he refused to let bitterness define his story. He focused on his family, his music, and his calling. But even his closest circle was unprepared for what came next, a letter that stunned fans and offered a deeply personal farewell. Vince Gill's final letter wasn't prompted by scandal or crisis. It arrived quietly, filled with gratitude, reflection, and vulnerability, a gentle culmination of a career defined not just by talent but by sincerity. In his letter, which quickly spread among fans, Gill poured out his heart. He reflected on everything from his roots in Oklahoma to his early days with Pure Prairie League and his Grammy-winning solo journey. The message was never about fame. It was about connection, storytelling, and honoring the people who supported him along the way. The tone was humble and intimate. He thanked fans for believing in him, especially during times of personal struggle, through divorce, public criticism, and the unique challenge of loving someone as publicly revered as Amy Grant. He spoke of how the music gave him a home during times of displacement. "You all gave me a place to belong," he wrote. "In the noise, you gave me silence. In the chaos, you gave me purpose." This raw honesty was classic Vince Gill, never one to pretend or hide behind fame. He admitted to his own shortcomings, recalling times when he stayed silent or stepped away when he needed rest. He wrote about grace, both divine and human. "Grace saved me," he said, not just referring to his faith, but also to the patience and understanding shown by fans, family, and colleagues. He touched on the emotional cost of fame, especially when compounded by loss and criticism, but he didn't dwell in bitterness. Instead, he offered perspective, reminding fans that public lives, no matter how glamorous, come with unseen burdens. Gill urged fans not to cling to media portrayals or idealized versions of him, but to remember the music, the lyrics that felt like their own stories, and the shared magic of concerts where everything else faded away. This wasn't a traditional retirement announcement. There were no press tours or farewell events. It was simply Vince Gill being himself, genuine, vulnerable, and quietly saying, "I'll see you around." The response was overwhelming. Thousands of messages flooded in, thanking him for a lifetime of music and for staying true to himself in an industry often more focused on image than integrity. Fellow musicians praised him for stepping away not with spectacle, but with soul. Amy Grant, in a rare and heartfelt moment, commented on the letter. She shared how deeply it reflected who Vince was. "He's always been more comfortable with a guitar in his hands than a microphone at a podium," she said. This letter was his way of saying goodbye, not to music, but to the pressure, the pace, the constant demand to always be on. And perhaps that was the most powerful part of all. Vince Gill wasn't leaving because he had to. He was choosing to pause, to reflect, to protect what mattered, and to honor the life and legacy he built without ever compromising who he was. In an industry driven by applause, Vince chose silence. And in that silence, he spoke volumes.